actually many people who design game-based assessment actually look at or think about. How do you know that you're actually testing what you want people to know and not just how good someone is in the game? And this is an issue of all types of automated assessment, but I think it gets compounded by the fact that you have the whole game mechanic and mechanism around it. Assessing game performance, I think, is troubling really for two reasons. And one of these is, I think, really linked to what Amanda said earlier, that poor game performance doesn't mean that a student's not learning. A student could be learning by making mistakes. One of the key benefits of games is this ability and space to make mistakes, to try again, to regroup, to reflect, to learn from mistakes, and move on. Now, if we're just assessing people on how well they do, this takes away some of this safety and some of this idea of it being a playful space. Poor game performance could also be due to factors such as low gaming literacy, which I think is a big equity issue. That if you've played that type of game before, one of the things that came up in my own PhD research is that people that have never used a 3D navigation can have massive problems with it. So I found with the 3D game that I was using that some students who had no gaming literacy in that area spent lots of time navigating and no time learning. And this is true. We can't assume that everybody is absolutely happy in navigating in 3D worlds, or that there are various usability issues, or that people just don't have a concept of what that game might mean. So, for example, in an adventure game, you know that when you fairly early on come across a locked door, somehow, somewhere, you're going to have to find a key. It's a kind of adventure game standard. If you've never played an adventure game before, you could spend a long time trying to knock that door down with your feet before you realise that actually there's an accepted and agreed and understood solution. So assessment actually of this type might actually have more equity issues that need to be unpicked and explored. So I'm just reading Amanda's comment. Yeah. I think that this is the issue, is that how do we link learning in the game to learning in real life? And I think it's troubling for any type of learning, because unless you're actually doing real life, on-the-job, apprenticeship type learning, this is an issue for all assessment, not just games-based. But I think in games-based it gets, the problem gets increased because people bandy around ideas like we'll assess people entirely in the game. There's a wider point that it is difficult to automate any meaningful assessment, not just in respect to game-based assessment, and that we cannot underestimate the role and the judgment of the teacher to ensure that assessment is appropriate and fair. This is not to say that I'm entirely against in-game assessment. I'm not, and I think it does have advantages, it does have benefits, but it needs to be used with caution, I think would be with a caveat on that. There are negative considerations, and there may be better alternatives. Okay, so some examples of ways in which assessment can be designed for game-based learning. I'm a big fan of using predominantly external methods or more traditional methods of assessment around games, but using active methods. Now, these are just the kind of range of different examples that I've seen in various bits of literature or used myself. So things like reports on actions taken during the game, decisions made, justification of decisions made, critical analysis of consequences of decisions, future planning based on the end point of a game. So kind of, again, it's about getting this reflection, about getting this metacognition in there. Presentations on an aspect of the game. Now, there's an example in one of the case studies I'm going to give you about a group presentation to a board of directors, which is outside the game, but it's getting them to do something that's more akin to real life. Then the creation of artifacts, and I love this because it gives lots of potential for creativity. So getting them to produce posters around the marketing game, go out and make a video, use audio, use graphics, but actually do something that's creative and real-worldy that supports what's going on in the game. Online discussion posts, again, this is an example from one of the case studies. Can be assessed for contribution, critical engagement, reflection. You can look at things like community and support in there. Collaborative websites such as blogs and wikis. Um, I'm completely lost now. That's what I get for being laughed at. Again, it's about one of the things that games are not typically good at, or some games aren't, is actually getting collaboration going in the game. And sometimes this needs to be sort of done externally, but we do need to think about how collaboration happens. And often building collaboration into the assessment is one way of encouraging collaboration in the game. Narratives associated with the action in the game. So again, possibly using it for storytelling, getting people to think about characters, getting people to think about backstories, about future scenarios. One really nice example around this, which isn't actually around assessment, but it's using a game to construct narratives, was work that was done in New York, getting disadvantaged young males that were using Grand Theft Auto, which is actually an incredibly violent game, which involves basically driving around, shooting prostitutes, having fights, doing drug deals, and so on. But they were actually using that game as a way to start thinking about narratives and start thinking about change. Things like personal reflective accounts, using personal blogs, thinking about the actions taken in the game and what can be learned from it and what can be transferred from it. And things like portfolios, detailing the use of the game, decisions made, artifacts created, consequences, and so on. You could also I can do that. I'm looking at Frederick asking for references. I don't have a simple list at the moment. It would take me a while to compile one because, as I say, this was kind of off the top of my head based upon several years' worth of reading. But I could probably do that fairly quickly, she says. Leave that one with me. I'd have to think about how big. I mean, I can definitely give you some references. I'll do the 3 case studies today. And I probably shouldn't plug this till the end, but actually quite a lot of this comes from a chapter in my book, which I can give you the reference to. But I was not going to mention it. I was not going to plug it. The other example being portfolios. So the idea, for me, thinking about games-based assessment, and I think it's also about assessing anything that has an application to the real world, is being creative, being flexible, and actually thinking about how you foster reflection, how you foster metacognition, how you encourage transferability. Yeah, I will do. Okay, so I wanted to kind of finish off by having a look at, very briefly, at 3 different case studies, which show the use of either game-based learning with assessment or assessment of game-based learning. Now, the first one is a game called Marketplace. Now, this was a commercial online marketing simulation game in which players have, they basically make up teams and to make a series of company decisions over a number of decision periods, and they compete with other companies. Now, teams have to undertake market analyses, design marketing strategies, decide which products or product to produce, how to market them, come up with company strategies, and so on. And it aims to teach the application of marketing theory in a real-world context. Now, this was used, probably about 6 years ago by myself and a colleague who was a colleague in marketing, and I was involved in the project as an advisor, but also I was involved in the evaluation. And it was used throughout an entire 3rd-year undergraduate module as an applied marketing course at Napier University in Edinburgh. And this game aims to provide, it had an online environment, but students met face-to-face. So they had face-to-face tutorials, there was occasional lectures, but really they met in these tutorials, and they had to look at the decisions that needed to be made in the next decision period, agree them, and then put them into the online environment. And when it was and then at the end of each decision period, it would publish which company was making the most money, which had the most market share, and so on. Now, the assessment for that was not based on how well people performed in the game, because both myself and the lecturer felt that the game had to be seen as a safe learning experience, and that as soon as people started performing in the game, you would get behaviours such as aggressiveness, such as cheating, such as copy. You were actually opening yourself to a whole bunch of, because of the nature of the game, that there were winners and losers. It would automatically mean that if somebody won, somebody else was going to have to lose, and this wasn't terribly equitable.